start because it means a lot to me. The work that you guys doing. I am familiar with the center that doing all this work, and I have one suggestion, and that is that in our community there are people who went through a lot of experience, and their experience is not somehow documented in, I think in general it is, but personal experience is not documented in the center's documentation book. And so I thought to give this suggestion that maybe you can call to the community and ask those people who have first-hand experience. For example, they've been in Evin prison after 1980, and in a meeting, and then they can present and they can speak about their experience, and it is going to be recorded. And because I am really thinking about this community, that the people are getting older and older, and then they they may not be among us anymore.
So basically, we would have a survivors panel. I think that would be great.
All for those people who have first-hand experience.
For them to tell their story, we could record it. It could be a really powerful piece.
Yes.
We should speak about that if you'll stick around after that.
Thank you.
I have a question. Do you concentrate on any refugee status or perhaps like problems that refugees run into in Canada or deportations that they might face? It's unfair. Do you guys focus on those cases at all or not?
So our mandate is to look at human rights abuses that occurred inside Iran, but naturally, because of the witnesses that we speak to and the issues that they go through once they leave Iran, because obviously we don't do field investigations inside Iran. As much as I would love to, I'm afraid that we do not, we cannot get permission to do so. So we have to do our interviews in Turkey, in Iraqi Kurdistan, in Europe, and often it's with people who've left. And a lot of them are going through the UNHCR process. So one thing that we do, that I do on a weekly basis, in fact, is write support letters for refugees that we've interviewed and who need to send support letters from organizations to support their application. So that's one thing we do. One thing that we're organizing right now actually is a fundraiser, like a kind of benefit concert, but the money would go to refugees in Turkey, because especially this winter, a lot of them don't have heating in their apartments. I mean, I've interviewed them in their homes where they're staying, and a lot of them don't have heating. Some of them don't even have warm enough clothing, because a lot of times, as you're probably well familiar, they had to be, when they left Iran, some of them were mamnun khuruj, so they had to just, be smuggled. They had to pay a smuggler and escape, and so they obviously came with very little possessions. So that's something that we're working on, because as a nature of where our work has taken us, it's not really strictly the mandate of the group, but once you are in people's homes, once you speak to them about, some of the most intimate and emotional things that have happened to them, you don't then just cut off the relationship after getting that testimony and having them open up to you. So we do work. It's not part of our formal mandate, but to answer your question, we definitely help. So.
I'm just wondering, from what I understand from the work of your center, you're collecting evidence for a future possibility of something in the same vein as an ICTY or an ICC. And so with the possibility, or with the view of the possibility that might never take place, that what an ICTY does is something that had a lot of political will behind it, and basically Bosnia and Herzegovina is for all purposes a protectorate of the international community. So that's not the same situation with Iran. And in the in a future world where an ICTY situation or an international criminal tribunal of Iranian leaders and regime leaders who were akin to the Karadiches and the Mladiches and the Milosevic's will never happen, what would be then the I suppose use of all of this information that's been collected by your center, simply because it does seem like a very kind of far off situation that these leaders, many of whom have now immigrated to Canada under various categories of Canadian, legal Canadian citizenship and are, living among us and doing very well here. If that were never to happen, that they would ever be legally prosecuted, then what would have been the raison d'etre for your center at that point?
That's a great question. The aim of having some kind of formal judicial proceeding, I think, is the highest aim. At the very base level, this documentation is foundational for many reasons. I mean, one thing that we do in the present, not years off, but in the present, is assist in asylum proceedings. We're asked for different statements with UN agencies. I would say that's actually the biggest area in which our documents would go for different reasons. A lot of times it's actually people who are putting together films or books or projects. The information that's contained there goes to many different purposes. What I was trying to relate and what I hope is what I saw in The Hague that didn't work, and it was because that foundational work wasn't there, so that if one day it could be proceedings inside a free Iran, it could be proceedings that are sort of an international hybrid, it could just be a commission of inquiry or some kind of truth commission, or those could not happen. But the documents will still be there. People will still be able to write about it, refer to it, and know that it happened. They will, because I think somebody said documentation is truth, and I think that was a great answer, because I'll relate something that happened. When we were working on the report, I think there was some stack up there about the executions of Kurds after the revolution. I wrote an opinion editorial about what had happened and also what had happened in April 1980 with Sanandaj, the 24-day war. I submitted it to CNN, the opinion side of CNN. I had written for them before. The editor came back to me within an hour and said, "This is great." It was during the time that there was the siege of Benghazi in Libya, and I compared the siege of Sanandaj to the siege of Benghazi, maybe an exact parallel, but anyway, I wrote this piece. She said, "This is great." 3 hours later, she called me again and said, "You know what? I'm having a really difficult time fact-checking this." She said, because when I type in Kurds, Sanandaj, 1980, none of this pops up. And I said, we have sources in Farsi, there's sources in Kurdish. I think some French journalists wrote about it at the time. It's archival, I can dig it up for you. And she said, well, there's nothing in English. And there's nothing that you can just find online if you do a search. And to me, that was really significant. It was like, if it's not on Google, it doesn't exist, first of all. Secondly, it showed me that unless that record is built up, so that there's these documents that you can look to, so that people's experiences are validated and actually put in a formal record somewhere, and in this day and age, where everything is easily accessible through the internet and things are recorded in real time, like with Syria and what's happening there on social, it's recorded in real time through videos and so on, then it's like it didn't happen. And That's one thing to think about in terms of why we do this. It's not only so that hopefully one day, you know, the highest aim could be that we would really get some sort of justice and accountability for what happened, but it's also so that people know that their experiences were real and that it happened and that the world knows it too. Because that experience was really significant. That for her it was like, well, none of the readers would be able to know that what you're telling me is the truth.
Gissou, can I just add something? Absolutely echo everything that Gissou said, but I think that was an excellent question on your part. What I would add to that is something that I alluded to when I was speaking, which is that there are international institutions, international policymakers that try to devise policy on Iran, and the way they do that is they obviously look to sources. The Iranian government spends an inordinate amount of time and energy in creating what I would argue is a fabricated version of history and a fabricated version of what's happening inside the country. And the work of the IHRDC, not only is it useful down the road should there ever be an actual trial, but it's actually useful in devising Iran policy at the UN, in Canada, in Washington, wherever. This accurate historical record actually leads us to much better policy here in Canada.
Yeah. When I was saying that we submit it to UN agencies and so on, we also advise governments on what kind of policies to take and things like that, vis-a-vis the human rights situation.
I want to follow what my learned friend and colleague Murtaza said. First of all, I'm very happy that Mr. Raeissi is working with you, somebody who has objective view about human rights in Iran, somebody who has practically worked on human rights, and somebody who knows Farsi and could easily communicate with the community. And I do hope that his mission will be extended to other cities of Canada, like Montreal, Vancouver, and Winnipeg, and other cities. This is very important. So Murtaza said, okay, connect with people who are survivors. I say connect also with agencies who are working in this field, and either Canadian agencies or Iranian agencies. There are two issues on methodology that I wanted to just share with you. The first thing is the issue of inherent nature of the Iranian regime as a theocratic regime, that whatever happens goes back to the nature of the government, and some of the human rights violations are structural, inherent with the regime. And I think that should be taken into consideration in any kind of documentation and research. Is extremely, extremely important. The second issue, whatever you document, has been continuing since the very first day, even before the regime ascended to the power, is a kind of extrapolation to the future event. Then on your work, I think is extremely important and very well helpful. Everything you have done so far is well documented and so very good and authentic in terms of a good documentation about situation in Iran. However, there are three shortcomings here that I want to, if you have resources, you take into consideration. One, you have not adequately dealt with the crime of torture in Iran. So you have said here and there, but torture as a crime, and also as a crime against humanity and war crime, you have not dealt with this issue adequately. The second issue related to torture and related to war and related to other types of crimes like genocide of Baha'is, to some extent you have documented the issue of trauma, specifically collective trauma in Iran. Because I think there are lots of problems that I think when we speak about Holocaust, the Jewish Holocaust, there has been Iranian Holocaust as well, with the consequence of trauma that so has affected everybody across the board in Iran, and that should be documented. Thirdly, there should be a connection between civil and political rights on the one hand, and economic, cultural, and social rights on the other. So you have dealt with the first, but to some extent you have ignored the other, cultural, economic, social, and cultural rights. So the issue of poverty in Iran and how far the present regime is responsible for the poverty, the rights of workers, and so many other things related to economic rights. And I think we would please consider that.
On the third thing that you just mentioned, it's wonderful that you bring it up because it's been something that I think needs to be addressed. And to be honest, we're not a huge team. And we really, I think if there's an appetite for that from the community here and elsewhere, then it would be great to speak about how that can actually come to be. You know, if there are people that you know that would want to, you know, help put together a report like that, that would want to, because these things, of course, like to have people work with us, it does, to be frank, cost money. And a lot of people that work with us do give their time freely because they care about the mission. But there's things like sending people to different, on trips, basically, to be able to collect evidence. There's even the cost of just Skyping someone. So it really comes down to resources. And I just finished editing one of our responses to something that has to do with economic, social, and cultural rights for the UN, basically. And I realized that there's so much more work to be done. And that's, I think, a discourse that's going on a lot now, and the UN meetings that I attend especially. It's like, well, you know, we concentrate so much on civil and political, we also have to look at these other rights, but I think it's a question of resources. So I would love to speak to you afterwards if you have some specific ideas for what part of that problem we could tackle. I mean, one idea was that we're putting in plans for a report on labor unions, because there hasn't been, I think, a very full and comprehensive report on that I've seen so far. So we wanted to do a report on that, and that would also tie into a lot of economic issues that have been previously unexplored in some of our work. But so maybe we can talk after the session a bit more about that, if you have any specific ideas or people here who would be interested in that.